You people don't belong in the executive suite. Clients like that don't look like you. Bentley Jones's words cut through the marble silence like a blade. His voice carried authority that didn't come from rank, but from prejudice polished into confidence. Tricia Richards stood at the center of the lobby, poised in her long crimson coat and white head wrap that gleamed under the bank's golden lights. Pearls traced her neckline, delicate, composed. Beside her, Zack Richards adjusted his blue tie with quiet restraint, the gesture of a man used to boardrooms, not altercations. The Crestline National Bank headquarters was supposed to be a place of transactions and civility. Polished glass, marble floors, soft jazz humming overhead. Instead, it had become a theater of humiliation. Have you ever witnessed a fortune turn the tables so fast? Watch as Tricia and Zack Richards face security's scorn in Crestline Bank's marble halls. But before we begin, like this video, click on the subscribe button, and comment below where you are watching from. Your support helps to bring more thrilling stories like this, and I am sure you wouldn't want to miss it. Now let's dive in. Tricia stood in her white dress and crimson coat, elegance wrapped in quiet power. Her husband, Zack, matched her calm, dressed in a cream jacket and blue tie. They had come for a simple task: sign documents that would finalize the transfer of ownership for Crestline National Bank, a deal months in the making. But the guards saw something else. Bentley's hand hovered near his belt as he stepped forward, flanked by Finn Houston and Frank Thompson. "Show some ID," he barked. "We've had imposters try this stunt before." Tricia's voice was even. "We have an appointment upstairs." "Yeah, sure you do." Bentley's laugh was harsh. "In the executive suite. That's for real clients." Zack held up a folder, calm as always. "Everything you need is right here." Bentley snatched the folder, rifled through its contents without reading. "Fake documents," he muttered, loud enough for everyone in the lobby to hear. "You people really think dressing up makes you one of them?" Phones lifted. Customers turned to watch. Tricia's pearls caught the light as she straightened her posture. "Call the police," she said softly. "Please do." Her calm infuriated Bentley. He stepped closer, shoving Zack back when he tried to intervene. "Don't tell me what to do," he snapped. "Hands where I can see them." Frank grabbed Zack's arm. Finn reached for Tricia's wrist. The confrontation unfolded under the grand chandelier, ugly and humiliating, a scene that would soon circle the world. Zack's folder fell open, papers scattering across the polished floor. Among them, bank documents bearing the Crestline seal. None of the guards noticed the signature at the bottom: Zachary and Patricia Richards Holdings, LLC, majority investors. The onlookers gasped. Some whispered, others recorded. Bentley's tone dripped with arrogance. "You're lucky we don't cuff you right here." Tricia's eyes locked on his. "Do it then," she said, her voice soft but unflinching. "Make your mistake official." That line cut through the lobby's noise like a prophecy. A door slammed open behind them. Elaine Porter, the branch manager, rushed out, heels clicking sharply. She froze at the sight, her own guards restraining two elegantly dressed clients as cameras rolled. "What on earth is happening here?" Bentley turned, puffed up with misplaced confidence. Caught these two trying to bluff their way into the executive suite. Fake papers, suspicious behavior. Elaine bent to pick up one of the fallen pages. Her eyes flicked to the signature, and the color drained from her face. "Officer Jones," her voice trembled. "These aren't imposters. They're the bank's new majority investors." The lobby fell silent. Bentley blinked, then glanced at the paper as if it were written in another language. That's not." Zack straightened his jacket, his tone calm but cutting. "Now you understand why we were here." Every camera in the room caught it. The dignity, the stillness, the reversal. Elaine's hand went to her mouth. "Oh my God!" The crowd stared, realization sweeping through them like a wave. Phones kept recording. The marble pillars, the chandelier, even the cold floor, all bore witness to the moment arrogance met its reckoning. And in the quiet that followed, Tricia Richards stood unbroken, her crimson coat blazing like a flag of justice against the white walls of prejudice. That morning wasn't supposed to be historic. It was supposed to be quiet. 2 signatures, 1 meeting, no cameras. But for Tricia and Zack Richards, who had built empires from rejection and earned respect through restraint, fate had different plans. The marble lobby of Crestline still vibrated with tension. Elaine's revelation had cracked the air open, and now the entire building seemed to listen to its own shame. Bentley's hand dropped from Tricia's arm as if burned. "Ma'am, I didn't know." Tricia's voice was low, steady. "That's the problem. You never ask. You assume." The sentence hit harder than any shout could have. Elaine's instincts snapped back into control. Everyone stepped back. "Now!" she ordered. But phones were already up. Footage was already uploading. Bentley stumbled away, pale and speechless. Finn and Frank exchanged nervous glances, realizing the depth of their mistake. Elaine gestured toward the private elevator. "Mr. and Mrs. Richards, please, let's move upstairs. We can discuss this privately." Zack's voice carried quiet authority. "Lead the way." The couple walked through the parted crowd like royalty through a gauntlet of stairs. The elevator doors closed behind them with a soft chime, sealing the chaos below. The elevator hummed upward. Elaine gripped a folder to her chest, desperate to fill the silence. "I can't express how deeply sorry I am," she said. "If I'd known." Zack interrupted gently. "That's the point. You shouldn't have to know." Tricia's reflection in the steel door was calm but cold. Respect shouldn't depend on recognition. Elaine said nothing. The metallic echo of their assent filled the gap where excuses might have lived. When the doors opened on the 12th floor, sunlight flooded in, floor-to-ceiling glass, leather chairs, the smell of power. For once, the air up here felt heavy. Elaine ushered them in, fumbling for words. "Please, sit. I can't believe this happened." Tricia remained standing near the panoramic window. From this height, the city looked peaceful, almost innocent. The same couldn't be said of what had unfolded below. Zack spread the scattered documents across the polished table. "These were supposed to finalize the transition," he said. "Instead, they exposed the problem we're about to inherit." Elaine blinked. "Problem?" Tricia turned from the window. "Culture. That's your real liability." Elaine flinched. "I swear I'll make this right." Tricia's tone stayed cool. "You can't correct something you've never acknowledged. But you can start by learning." The words weren't cruel, just true. Elaine lowered her head. "Will you press charges?" Zack shook his head. "We're not here for revenge." Tricia added, "We're here for reform." The silence that followed was long and heavy, the kind that reforms begin with. Zack's eyes softened. "You know, the first time we walked into a bank together, we were laughed out." Elaine looked up, startled by the change in tone. Tricia smiled faintly. "He wore work boots. I wore hope. They told us to come back with someone who looked more qualified," Zack continued. "So we did." Tricia met his gaze. "We came back as the people who bought their company." The memory hung in the air like a quiet victory. "Prejudice has a short memory," Tricia said. "But we don't." Elaine's throat tightened. "You turned that pain into purpose." Zack nodded. "That's what wealth really is, knowing what to do with what tried to break you." The desk phone rang, slicing through the quiet. Elaine jumped. "Porter speaking." "Elaine, what the hell is going on?" It was CEO Charles Dunning, voice sharp with panic. "I'm seeing videos all over social media. Security roughing up 2 of our new investors. Get them upstairs immediately." Elaine swallowed. "They're already here, sir." "Good. Keep them there." "And Elaine," his tone darkened, If those guards haven't been suspended by the time I arrive, neither will you." The line went dead. Elaine looked at the couple helplessly. "He's on his way." Zack nodded calmly. "Then let him find us composed." Tricia finally sat, her red coat pooling around her like liquid fire. "Do you know what the hardest part of moments like this is, Ms. Porter?" Elaine shook her head. "It's realizing that even after everything we've achieved, some people will only ever see what they want to see." Zack leaned back, thoughtful. "But today, the world will see something different." Elaine frowned. "What's that?" "Grace," he said simply. Tricia smiled at that, though her eyes glistened. "And justice. Eventually, they meet." When they returned to the elevator, the weight in the air had changed. It was no longer humiliation, it was purpose crystallizing. Tricia exhaled softly. "You think people will forget this?" Zack shook his head. "They'll share it. And when they do, maybe they'll start thinking twice before judging the next couple who walks through a door." As the elevator descended, their reflections faced each other. Two calm figures framed by mirrored walls and destiny. The doors opened to chaos below. Reporters were gathering. Onlookers whispered. Bentley stood to the side, pale and shaking. Zack walked past him without a word. Tricia paused just long enough to say, "One day, you'll understand what you threw away today." Then she turned and walked into the sunlight. The driver smiled as they entered. "Beautiful morning, isn't it?" Tricia answered quietly. "Beautiful and broken." Zack squeezed her hand. "We'll fix it." She looked out the window as the city blurred past. "Tomorrow, we start something new." "The respect standard," Zack said, testing the phrase aloud. Tricia nodded. "A standard this bank will never forget." Behind them, the Crestline building gleamed in the sun, its glass facade reflecting their image back at itself. Dignity in red and white, calm in cream and blue, two figures walking away from humiliation and into legacy. By the time their car reached the edge of downtown, notifications had already begun to explode across every screen in the city. The world was watching. And the Richards were just getting started. The elevator doors slid shut, sealing in a silence thick with embarrassment and disbelief. Elaine Porter kept her eyes fixed on the floor numbers as they rose. 7, 8, 9, each chime marking another level of her shame. Downstairs, she could still hear Bentley's voice echoing in her head, dripping with arrogance. "You people don't belong in the executive suite." Now, she couldn't even meet Tricia Richards's eyes. Tricia stood perfectly still beside her husband, her red coat a blaze of calm defiance against the chrome reflections. Zack's posture was steady, his expression unreadable. There was no anger in him, just the kind of patience that felt more powerful than fury. The doors opened on the 12th floor. A sweep of glass, light, and quiet luxury greeted them. It was a world apart from the chaos below, Crestline National Bank's executive level, where only board members and top investors were allowed. Elaine hurried forward, swiping her access card to open the frosted glass doors of the conference room. Her fingers trembled. "Please, this way." Inside, the air smelled faintly of lemon polish and fresh ink. The long mahogany table gleamed under recessed lighting. A wall of floor-to-ceiling windows looked out over the city. Blue sky, gold rooftops, and 1,000 lives going about their day, oblivious to the storm that had just broken below. Elaine gestured for them to sit, but Tricia remained standing by the window. Her reflection in the glass looked almost regal. "Do you know what the saddest thing about prejudice is, Ms. Porter?" she asked quietly. "It doesn't even bother to whisper. It always assumes it's right." Elaine swallowed hard. "Mrs. Richards, I swear to you, none of this represents the bank's values." Zack's voice interrupted, calm but sharp enough to cut through her sentence. "It does, Ms. Porter. You just haven't had to look closely enough to see them." Elaine's face paled. Zack spread the folder across the table. The papers inside were crisp, marked with legal signatures and embossed seals. The Crestline National Bank board approval letter sat on top, the CEO's signature glistening in blue ink. "These," Zack said evenly, "finalize the transfer of ownership. As of 9:15 this morning, Tricia and Zack Richards Holdings, LLC, owns 53.4% of Crestline National Bank." Elaine's jaw slackened. She looked down at the letter, the realization hitting her like a physical blow. That means, Tricia said softly, "everything that happens in this building happens under our name." Elaine staggered into a seat. "Oh my God," Zack continued, his voice calm but carrying the weight of quiet authority. "We finalized this deal not to boast about wealth but to rescue this institution from collapse. Your credit liquidity ratios were days away from triggering a federal inquiry. The acquisition paperwork we brought today was the final stage of a long negotiation." Elaine could barely speak. "You saved the bank." Tricia turned from the window. "We invested in the people," she corrected. "The problem is, the people didn't invest in us." The words hung in the air like smoke. Zack leaned back slightly, his tone reflective. "We didn't plan on a grand entrance. No cameras, no press. Just a quiet visit, a few signatures, and a meeting with key staff." Elaine blinked. "Then why come through the main lobby?" Tricia's gaze met hers. "Because I wanted to see how people here treat others when they don't recognize power." The room went silent again. Zack nodded. "We'd seen the numbers, the turnover, the complaints buried in HR reports. Culture doesn't live on paper, Ms. Porter. It lives in behavior. We walked through that lobby as strangers to this system. What we found told us more than any report ever could." Elaine's fingers twisted together. "I can't defend what happened. I wish I could." Tricia's tone was level but cutting. "Wishes don't change systems. Accountability does." For a moment, Tricia turned back toward the window, her reflection merging with the city skyline. She remembered another window, smudged, rain-streaked, in a small Georgia town. They'd been newly married, clutching a loan application in a folder too thin to look serious. "Your business plan looks ambitious," the loan officer had said, voice polite but dismissive. "Maybe start smaller. Or come back with a co-signer." They had left the office in silence. Back then, Zack had been a construction foreman with a degree he never got to use. Tricia, a marketing assistant with ideas that outgrew her job title. Together, they had started buying derelict properties in their town, flipping them one at a time. When banks wouldn't lend, they borrowed from friends. When contractors quit, Zack worked nights himself. When clients underestimated them, Tricia charmed them into believers. Their first success came not from a loan, but from a promise: never let humiliation become hate. Within 10 years, they had built Richards Development Group, then Richards Energy, and finally our holdings, a tech real estate energy hybrid empire with investments across 3 continents. They never courted fame, only integrity. They didn't flaunt their wealth. They funneled it quietly into scholarships, housing projects, and clean energy startups. Every success was a silent defiance of the world that once said no. And now, they owned the very institution that once refused to believe in people like them. Elaine's voice shook as she flipped through the papers. You acquired US through our holdings?" Zack nodded. "Through a private equity intermediary. We wanted the transition discreet. No leaks, no panic." "Why Crestline?" she asked softly. Tricia stepped forward, the city light framing her like a portrait. "Because you were failing, and because this city still needs faith in something." She tapped the Crestline logo embossed on the folder. "Banks are supposed to protect people, not profile them." Elaine lowered her head. "We failed you before you even began." "No," Tricia said. "You failed yourselves. You let arrogance cost you the dignity of service." Zack folded his hands. "Our visit this morning wasn't about protocol. It was a test. to see if this place still understood what respect looks like when it isn't wearing a suit. Elaine looked up, horrified. "You mean you plan to come?" "Unannounced," Tricia confirmed. "To observe. To learn. To remind ourselves that numbers don't reveal culture. People do." Elaine pressed her palms to her face. "And we failed that test completely." Tricia's silence was her only answer. The door buzzed. A receptionist's voice crackled through the intercom. "Miss Porter, Mr. Dunning is on his way up." Elaine stiffened. "The CEO." Zack glanced at his watch. "Then let's use the time we have left wisely." He stood, walking toward the panoramic window. The skyline glimmered. This morning could have been a celebration of transition. Instead, it's an indictment of perception. Tricia joined him. "Do you know how many times people like us walk into places we've earned the right to be, and are told we don't belong?" Elaine whispered, "Too many." Tricia's voice dropped to almost a whisper. "Every time, we choose calm over chaos, dignity over outrage. But sometimes silence speaks louder than shouting." The memory of Bentley's voice still rang through her mind. "You people don't belong here." No, she thought. We belong everywhere our integrity carries us. Zack opened his phone, scrolling through the contract files they'd signed earlier that morning at a private attorney's office downtown. He turned the screen toward Elaine. "These signatures finalized before we even entered your lobby. Crestline belongs to us now." The ink was dry. Elaine blinked in disbelief. "Then why risk walking in without an escort? You could have avoided all of this." Tricia's gaze sharpened. "Because comfort never teaches. Exposure does." Zack smiled faintly. "We've spent our lives building in silence, Ms. Porter. Today, the silence broke for a reason." Tricia crossed her arms, her tone cooling. "Sometimes, you have to be humiliated to expose a culture that hides behind courtesy." Elaine's eyes glistened. "You're right. We've been blind." Tricia's expression softened slightly. "Then open your eyes. Because from this moment forward, blindness has consequences." The glass doors opened sharply. Charles Dunning, Crestline CEO, stepped in, gray-haired, red-faced, visibly rattled. "Elaine," he barked. "I had to hear from the board's legal counsel that we've had a PR catastrophe in the lobby. What on earth?" He stopped cold as he recognized Zack and Tricia. "Mr. Dunning," Zack greeted evenly. "We were just discussing leadership culture." Dunning's eyes darted from the papers on the table to Elaine's pale face. "Is this?" Elaine nodded weakly. "They're the new majority owners, sir." The words seemed to physically drain him. "Dear God." Tricia turned slowly, her poise unshaken. "I believe your staff mistook us for intruders." Dunning rubbed his forehead. "This is a nightmare." "No," Tricia corrected. "It's a mirror." He froze at that. Zack gestured toward the documents. "We were finalizing the transition quietly. But your lobby has made that impossible. So, let's use it." Dunning blinked. "Use it?" Tricia nodded. "To start the change this bank clearly needs. Systemic change. Not just apologies." He hesitated. "The footage is already spreading. I can have it taken down." "No," Zack interrupted firmly. "Let it stay. The world deserves to see what happened." Dunning frowned. "That's a PR disaster." Tricia met his gaze. "Or an opportunity for redemption." The room fell into a heavy silence. Dunning exhaled and sat, looking older than he had a moment ago. "You're right," he said finally. "We've become complacent. I can't defend what I saw." Tricia clasped her hands. "Then don't. Fix it." Elaine glanced up. "How?" Zack's answer was immediate. "By replacing reaction with responsibility. By training not for protocol, but for empathy. by remembering that respect should never depend on recognition. Dunning nodded slowly, the words sinking in like a confession. Tricia stepped closer to him. You'll have our full support, but understand this. We didn't buy this bank to sit quietly. We bought it to rebuild it. Her voice softened, though her eyes still burned with conviction. We're not here to punish. We're here to prove that reform is wealth too. The meeting drifted into stillness. Outside, the city pulsed with life. Cars honked below, sunlight glinted off rooftops, and somewhere down there, Bentley Jones sat on a bench replaying his own words, now viral across every feed. Zack finally broke the silence. Tricia, he said, glancing her way, do you remember what your grandmother used to say about power? Tricia smiled faintly. Power doesn't reveal who you are, it reveals who you think others are. Elaine looked up, tears streaking her cheeks. You're both remarkable. Tricia's tone was soft but firm. No, we're just prepared. Because the world keeps giving us the same lesson until we learn it. By the time the meeting ended, noon light streamed across the boardroom table. Dunning had promised immediate suspension of the 3 guards and an internal review of every security policy. As they prepared to leave, he asked quietly, Will you attend the staff address tomorrow? It might help calm things. Tricia paused. Yes, but not to calm things. To start them. Zack collected the folders and glanced once more out the window. Today wasn't an embarrassment for us, Charles. It was a revelation for you. The couple moved toward the door. Elaine followed, still visibly shaken. Before leaving, Tricia turned back to her, voice softer now. Ms. Porter, you handled yourself with grace once you knew the truth. Keep that. You'll need it. Elaine nodded. Thank you, Mrs. Richards. I hope you'll let me help fix what's broken. Tricia smiled faintly. We'll hold you to that. As the elevator doors opened again, Zack and Tricia stepped inside. The hum of conversation from below rose faintly up the shaft. Somewhere in that crowd, stories were already being told, of arrogance exposed, of justice walking in heels and a crimson coat. Zack adjusted his tie. You think we made our point? Tricia's smile was calm, almost wistful. Not yet. But the world's about to. She looked down at her phone. Dozens of notifications lit the screen. News outlets, social posts, hashtags beginning to trend. Hashtag Crestline incident, hashtag you people don't belong here, hashtag the Richards reveal. Zack chuckled softly. Guess fate decided to handle PR for us. Tricia slipped her phone into her purse. Then let's make sure it tells the right story. The doors closed on their reflection, dignity wrapped in quiet power, poised for the storm about to unfold. Downstairs, the guards sat in silence, waiting for HR escorts that would end their careers. Upstairs, Elaine drafted the first of many apologies. And across the city, every television, tablet, and phone began to play the same clip. You people don't belong in the executive suite. Clients like that don't look like you. Followed by Tricia Richards's calm, devastating reply. Call the police. Please do. Let's make this official. The image froze on her face, unflinching, graceful, resolute. It would become the still frame of the story that changed everything. As the sun set over the city that night, Tricia stood beside Zack on the balcony of their penthouse, the skyline glowing below. He poured 2 glasses of wine. We didn't plan for today to be historic. Tricia took hers, her voice low. History rarely asks for permission. They clinked glasses gently, the sound ringing like a promise. Power reveals character, she said. But so does prejudice. And as the city lights reflected in her eyes, Tricia Richards smiled, not with triumph, but with purpose. Because tomorrow, justice would trend. And this time, it would wear red. The night air in the city shimmered with static, the hum of millions of screens lighting up, one clip at a time. The video that had begun in a marble lobby now lived on every device in America. You people don't belong in the executive suite. Clients like that don't look like you. Bentley Jones's words looped endlessly, each replay more damning than the last. The image of Tricia Richards, poised, unbroken, in her crimson coat, became the center of it all. Her calm defiance, her haunting line, "Call the police. Please do." The world could not look away. By 9 p.m., hashtags had become movements. Hashtag you people don't belong here, hashtag Crestline incident, hashtag respect is wealth. Clips were remixed into newsreels, reaction videos, podcasts, even music covers. Commentators dissected every frame, the shove, the tone, the silence of the bystanders, the quiet grace of the woman who never raised her voice. Within 12 hours, what had begun as humiliation had become history. News anchors spoke with urgent voices. In a shocking turn of events, the couple harassed at Crestline National Bank have been identified as Tricia and Zack Richards, multi-millionaire investors and the new majority owners of the very bank where the incident occurred. The footage played behind every headline, every panel, every opinion show. Some hosts spoke of injustice. Others spoke of karma. But all spoke of Tricia. Her red coat became an icon, cropped into profile photos, painted into murals, used in magazine covers under the caption, "Grace Under Fire." Crestline's headquarters, once a symbol of wealth, now gleamed beneath protest banners. Crowds gathered outside, chanting for accountability. Posters read, "Respect should be standard." Others, "You judged wrong." A group of young activists stood shoulder to shoulder, holding signs that read simply, "They own the bank." By morning, the world had moved from shock to outrage. Bentley Jones's name trended globally. His face, frozen mid-sneer, was the new symbol of arrogance and racism. Journalists camped outside his small brick house on the west side of the city, their microphones thrust toward his door like accusations. He peeked through the blinds, his face pale, his uniform discarded on the couch. The voice from the TV filled the silence. Bentley Jones, the security officer heard in the viral Crestline video, has been placed on indefinite suspension pending investigation. His phone buzzed with hundreds of messages, most unprintable. The few that weren't were from old co-workers. "You messed up, man. They'll make an example out of you." He turned off the TV, but the echo remained. His own words, his own voice, forever captured. "You people don't belong here." He pressed his palms over his ears, but the world wouldn't mute. The internet never forgets. Inside Crestline's top floor, the atmosphere was war room tense. Charles Dunning paced the length of the conference room, every step betraying exhaustion. Elaine Porter sat at the far end, scrolling through a flood of public backlash on her tablet. "Every branch is getting hate mail," she murmured. "There are protests in 8 cities already." Dunning slammed his palm on the table. 8. It'll be 80 by the weekend. This is a public relations inferno. Zack Richards stood near the window, hands clasped behind his back. "It's not an inferno, Charles. It's a reflection. You're just seeing your culture in daylight." Dunning turned to him, voice strained. "I've offered to issue a statement." Tricia, seated beside her husband, looked up. "And say what? That you're sorry you got caught." He froze. Tricia's voice softened, but her words landed like stones. "Apologies don't build trust. Change does." Elaine exhaled. "Then we need direction. From you both. The public is listening. The staff is panicking." Zack nodded slowly. "Then let's give them something worth hearing." By noon, a press release hit every major outlet in the country. Statement from the office of Tricia and Zack Richards, majority owners of Crestline National Bank. "We will not pursue personal retaliation. We seek systemic reform." What happened at Crestline is not an isolated incident. It is a mirror reflecting deeper issues that must be addressed. Respect is not a privilege. It's a standard. Within minutes, the quote flooded social media. Hashtag respect is wealth trended above celebrity gossip, above sports, above everything else. People began printing the line on t-shirts, banners, and profile banners. Students used it in speeches. A senator quoted it in Congress. Bentley Jones's video became a training reel in corporate bias seminars across the world. Back in the Richards penthouse, the couple sat side by side at their glass dining table, laptops open, phones pinging non-stop. Their media advisor, Janine Moore, joined via video call. "You two are global news now," she said, half in awe, half in warning. CNN, BBC, The Times, everyone wants interviews. Tricia shook her head. "We're not giving any." Janine blinked. "Not even a short clip to control the narrative?" Zack smiled faintly. "The narrative controls itself when the truth is visible." Tricia added, "And our focus isn't revenge, it's rebuilding." Janine sighed. "Then we need to show that. People are waiting for your next move." Zack leaned forward. "Then let's give them one worth following." That evening, while the protests surged outside Crestline branches, the Richards met with Elaine and Dunning in a private session on the 12th floor. Stacks of files filled the table: employee reviews, disciplinary records, internal complaints long ignored. Tricia flipped through them methodically. How many of these involved discriminatory behavior? Elaine hesitated. Too many. And how many were actually resolved? Almost none. Zack closed the file and looked up. "Then we start there. No press conference. No slogans. Quiet correction." Dunning rubbed his temples. "You're planning a purge." Tricia shook her head. "We're planning a standard." He frowned. "A standard?" Zack smiled faintly. "The respect standard." Elaine looked intrigued. "What is that?" Tricia folded her hands. "A framework for change. Training, accountability, empathy. Every staff member, from the CEO to the security desk, must complete an empathy and bias certification. No exceptions. Every promotion reviewed through inclusion metrics. Every complaint followed by mandatory review." Dunning's expression was grim. "You'll tear the system apart." "Then let's hope it was worth rebuilding," Zack said. By midnight, the streets around Crestline headquarters were lit with flashbulbs and chants. Crowds held phones high, replaying the same 40 seconds of footage that had shaken a nation. One sign read, "From humiliation to ownership." Another, "She didn't shout, she changed the system." A young girl in a red jacket stood with her mother near the barricades, holding a small handmade poster that said, "I want to be like Tricia." Inside, Tricia stood by the window, looking down at the sea of lights below. Her phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. "They're saying your story gave people courage." "Thank you." She smiled softly. "The story isn't over yet." Zack joined her, placing a hand on her shoulder. "It's only just begun." Across town, Bentley Jones sat on his couch, surrounded by the dim glow of television screens. Every channel was the same. His name, his voice, his face. A reporter's voice rang through the living room. Security Officer Bentley Jones has been suspended following the viral incident at Crestline National Bank. His colleagues, Finn Houston and Frank Thompson, have also been placed under investigation. Sources confirm that disciplinary action is expected. His phone buzzed again. This time, it was his supervisor. "Return your badge and credentials tomorrow morning." He dropped the phone. It clattered against the floor. Outside his house, cameras flashed through the blinds. Reporters called out his name. His neighbors watched from across the street, whispering. Bentley buried his face in his hands. His voice cracked, barely a whisper. It wasn't supposed to be like this. But somewhere in the back of his mind, another voice answered, the one that had mocked and sneered hours before. "You people don't belong here." Now, it was he who didn't belong. By dawn, the world had chosen sides. Editorials hailed the Richards as modern reformers. News panels dissected the Respect standard before it was even implemented. Crestline stock dipped briefly, then stabilized when the Richards announced they would personally oversee a new diversity board. A reporter asked at the morning press conference, "Mrs. Richards, how do you feel about becoming a symbol of this movement?" Tricia smiled faintly. "Symbols fade. Standards last." The quote went viral again. In the following days, videos flooded the internet. Employees at banks, airports, and offices recounting their own experiences of judgment and bias. The phrase, "respect is wealth," appeared in protest art, documentaries, and music lyrics. For once, a scandal had become a revolution. Elaine Porter worked tirelessly under the Richards' direction, implementing new procedures, holding town halls with employees, and rewriting Crestline's employee handbook from the ground up. Dunning, exhausted but reinvigorated, began to see something he hadn't in years. The bank becoming more than a business, it was becoming an example. And through it all, Tricia and Zack never raised their voices, never sought revenge, never looked backward. They simply rebuilt, one policy, one principle, one person at a time. Meanwhile, Bentley Jones found himself jobless. Security firms refused to hire him. His name had become synonymous with humiliation. Even his old friends avoided his calls. He scrolled through social media, his own face staring back from memes, documentaries, commentary threads. He saw Tricia on a talk show, her calm voice filling the room. Forgiveness isn't weakness. It's wisdom. But accountability is non-negotiable. Bentley turned off the screen and sat in silence. The quiet was worse than the noise. Weeks passed. Protests turned to seminars. Outrage turned to reform. And Tricia Richards's red coat, once a symbol of injustice, became the emblem of resilience. She and Zack stood before Crestline's employees at the first official rollout of the Respect standard. Cameras flashed, but this time, by invitation. Tricia spoke simply. "This isn't about punishment. It's about progress. We can't change yesterday, but we can make sure tomorrow starts differently." Applause filled the room. Zack followed with quiet conviction. Dignity should never depend on recognition. From now on, it won't. They clasped hands as the crowd rose in standing ovation. Outside, the city skyline reflected in the bank's glass facade, a mirror reborn. That night, as the Richards drove home, the radio played a news commentary. In less than a week, a single act of prejudice became a national turning point. The Richards didn't just own the bank, they owned the narrative. They turned shame into reform, humiliation into hope. And for the first time in a long time, America listened. Tricia gazed out at the lights passing by, her reflection faint in the window. "The internet never forgets," she said softly. Zack smiled. "Then let's make sure it remembers the right things." She nodded, her crimson coat glowing faintly under the city lights. For once, the world wasn't watching to judge. It was watching to learn. And somewhere in the distance, the echo of Bentley's words had changed forever. No longer a curse, but a reminder of what happens when arrogance meets grace. Because the internet never forgets. And neither does justice. A week had passed since the video shook the world. A week since marble floors turned into battlegrounds for truth. Now, those same marble floors gleamed under the soft hush of anticipation. Cameras weren't rolling this time, but every breath in the lobby seemed to hold one question. What happens when justice walks back through the same door it was denied? The air was thick with tension as Tricia and Zack Richards entered Crestline National Bank, not as victims this time, but as its undisputed owners. No one dared to stop them. The moment their heels clicked against the marble, whispers rippled across the room. Employees stood at attention. Security officers shifted nervously. Elaine Porter waited near the entrance, her hands clasped, eyes filled with both relief and worry. The guards, Bentley Jones, Finn Houston, and Frank Thompson, were already there. They stood against the far wall, in plain suits instead of uniforms, their faces pale and drawn. The viral storm had left them hollow. Bentley looked older, as though the weight of his own arrogance had crushed something inside him. Tricia's red coat moved like a quiet flame across the room. She didn't smile. She didn't need to. Power, when rightfully earned, didn't announce itself. It simply was. "Mr. and Mrs. Richards," Elaine began nervously, "the board and senior staff are assembled upstairs." Zack nodded. "Then let's begin." They rode the elevator in silence, the same elevator where humiliation had once traveled upward. Now it carried authority. When the doors opened onto the 12th floor, the entire executive boardroom was filled. Every director, every department head, and every senior manager was present. The room buzzed with quiet dread. Tricia and Zack entered side by side, calm as a storm about to begin. Charles Dunning stood. "Mr. and Mrs. Richards, thank you for joining us." Tricia's gaze swept across the room. "No," she said softly. "Thank you for being here. This meeting isn't a courtesy, it's accountability." The hush that followed was total. She turned toward the end of the table, where Bentley, Finn, and Frank sat like schoolboys awaiting judgment. Bentley's hands fidgeted with his tie. Finn avoided her gaze entirely. Frank stared at the table. Tricia clasped her hands. Her tone was polite, almost gentle, but every word carried precision. "Last week," she began, "we came as clients and were treated as criminals. Today, we return as your employers." The words landed with the force of thunder behind glass. No one spoke. Not even the hum of the air conditioning dared to interrupt her. She turned to Bentley. "Tell me, Officer Jones," she said quietly, "what made you so sure we didn't belong?" Bentley's throat bobbed. His voice cracked. "Ma'am, I made a mistake." Tricia tilted her head slightly. "A mistake." He nodded quickly. "Yes, I misjudged." Zack's voice cut in, smooth but sharp as steel. "You didn't misjudge, Mr. Jones. You profiled." Bentley flinched. Tricia stepped closer, her heels echoing in the silence. "You looked at us, and in a single second, you decided we were a threat. Not because of our behavior, but because of what you saw." Her tone never rose, but the quietness made it unbearable. She paused beside him. "And tell me, was it worth it? The humiliation, the headlines, the protests? Was that 5 seconds of bias worth your dignity?" Bentley's lips trembled. "No, ma'am." Tricia studied him for a long moment before walking back to the center of the room. Zack opened a file on the table and pressed a button on the small remote beside him. The projector came to life, displaying the footage everyone already knew too well. Bentley's sneer, the shove, the line that had become infamous. "You people don't belong here." The words echoed through the boardroom like a ghost. No one looked away. Then, Zack switched the feed. More clips appeared. Internal security footage from the lobby, staff testimonies, and HR reports that had gone unanswered for years. Complaints of discrimination. Whispered comments. Culture decay disguised as company loyalty. When he finally spoke, his tone was calm, steady, devastating. "We don't just invest money," he said. "We invest in culture. And yours, our bank's, is broken." Elaine looked down, ashamed. Dunning swallowed hard. Zack continued, his voice gaining quiet power. "What happened in that lobby wasn't an accident. It was a symptom. For too long, this institution has been run by arrogance disguised as protocol. By people who believe professionalism is permission to look down on others. That ends today." He clicked the remote once more. The screen shifted to a new document. Crestline's Respect Standard, Phase 1 Implementation. Tricia took over. Every employee will undergo empathy certification. Every manager will complete anti-bias training. Promotions will require inclusion review. Accountability will be measured, not promised. Her eyes swept the room. And to prove this isn't just a policy, it's a principle, We'll begin right now." She nodded to Elaine. Elaine opened a sealed envelope and handed it to Bentley. His hands shook as he unfolded it. The silence in the room was deafening. Zack spoke first. "Mr. Jones, effective immediately, your employment at Crestline National Bank is terminated." Bentley's lips parted, but no sound came out. Tricia's tone was cool, not cruel. "This isn't revenge, Mr. Jones. It's consequence. You created a moment that humiliated this institution and reinforced every reason reform is necessary. Consider this your lesson. What you did cannot be undone, but what you learn from it might still matter." Bentley stood, clutching the letter like a verdict. Finn and Frank stared at the table, pale and silent. Tricia's voice softened. "You may go." Bentley looked up, eyes wet. "Mrs. Richards, I'm sorry." She nodded. "So am I." He walked toward the door slowly, every step echoing through the room like the last notes of a song no one wanted to hear. When the door closed behind him, Tricia turned to the board. "This is what leadership looks like. Not in punishment, but in principle." Zack added quietly, "We will rebuild this place from the inside out. The world is watching, and not because of a scandal. Because of what we'll do next." Charles Dunning finally spoke. "You have our support, full and complete." Tricia's smile was faint but steady. "Then let's make history for the right reasons." Hours later, the Richards stood again in the lobby where it had all begun. The marble glistened. The air was still. For the first time, people greeted them with warmth, not suspicion. Tricia looked up at the Crestline emblem above the doors. "Funny," she said softly. "A week ago, this place felt like a battlefield." Zack smiled. "Now it feels like a beginning." Reporters waited outside, cameras flashing, but this time the story wasn't about humiliation, it was about restoration. Tricia adjusted her coat, her red reflection shimmering on the marble floor. "We didn't come here to win," she said quietly. "We came to change the rules." Zack nodded. "And we just did." They walked toward the exit, their silhouettes framed by sunlight pouring through the glass doors. As they stepped outside, a group of young employees waiting near the entrance applauded softly. One woman whispered, "Thank you." Tricia smiled at her, the kind that carried more grace than grandeur. "Respect," she said gently, "isn't given. It's practiced." That evening, the video of the boardroom meeting leaked, not by accident, but by design. A short clip circulated online. Tricia Richards standing in front of a room full of executives, saying with calm authority, "Last week, we came as clients and were treated as criminals. Today, we return as your employers." The clip went viral instantly. Commenters flooded in with words like poetic justice, power in grace, history in heels. Bentley's exit had become a symbol, not just of downfall, but of reckoning. News anchors called it the boardroom reversal. Editorials praised the Richards for rewriting what justice looks like in corporate America. And beneath all the trending noise, a new message began circulating quietly, shared across reels, shorts, and comment sections alike. If you believe in stories that prove respect still matters, subscribe for the next chapter. Because everyone knew this wasn't the end. It was only the turning point. Outside, under the fading gold of the city skyline, Tricia and Zack Richards stood watching the sun dip behind Crestline's glass tower. For them, justice wasn't about making someone small. It was about making a system see. And now, the world wasn't just watching, it was listening. The morning the hearings began, the city's skyline looked washed clean after an overnight rain. The marble steps of the state capitol gleamed beneath soft sunlight, a deceptive calm before the storm that was about to unfold within. Camera crews lined the street, reporters adjusting microphones, murmuring into earpieces as the story everyone had been waiting for took a new turn. For weeks, the world had replayed the moment Bentley Jones told Tricia Richards, "You people don't belong here." It had become more than a viral quote. It was now a rallying cry, a mirror held up to every boardroom, every lobby, every place where arrogance hid behind a badge or a title. And today, that mirror would face the system itself. When Tricia and Zack Richards arrived, the crowd erupted, not in cheers of celebrity, but in respect. Protesters held signs that read "Respect is wealth," and "Justice belongs here too." The same words Tricia had once whispered to Bentley now lived on posters and hashtags. Inside the chamber, the air was tense and expectant. Rows of journalists, officials, and members of the public filled the gallery as the Workplace Discrimination Oversight Committee convened. At the long mahogany table in front sat the panel: state representatives, labor attorneys, and ethics auditors. At the center of the room, Bentley Jones sat stiffly beside his lawyer, eyes hollow, his once proud posture deflated. Across from him sat Tricia Richards, calm, poised, radiant in a cream suit that caught the light like resolve made visible. When the gavel struck, silence settled. "Mrs. Richards," Chairwoman Eliza Freeman said, her tone respectful, "thank you for agreeing to testify today. Please begin when you're ready." Tricia rose slowly, placing a folder on the table before her. Her voice, when it came, was soft, but every syllable carried the weight of truth polished by pain. "Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. My name is Tricia Richards. I stand here not just for myself, but for every person who's ever been told, explicitly or silently, that they don't belong." The room leaned in. Even the cameras seemed to quiet. "That day in the bank," she continued, "wasn't the first time I'd been underestimated. My husband and I built our company from the ground up, one small project at a time, one closed door after another. But that morning, it wasn't rejection. It was humiliation. It wasn't personal. It was cultural. Every sneer, every assumption, was an echo of something older, deeper." Her gaze moved toward Bentley, who kept his head down. When he grabbed my arm, it wasn't just my body he restrained. It was the centuries of women who had to smile through injustice to survive it. When he told us we didn't belong, he wasn't speaking for himself. He was speaking for a system that's grown too comfortable confusing arrogance with authority. There were no tears, no trembling, just truth delivered with surgical precision. Tricia opened the folder and lifted a page. "This," she said, "is the official board letter my husband and I carried that morning. It confirmed our status as the new majority owners of Crestline National Bank. The same document those guards dismissed as fake." She laid it gently on the table. The gold crest shimmered under the lights. "Bias," she said quietly, "isn't always loud. Sometimes it whispers. Sometimes it wears a uniform, or a suit, or a polite smile. And until we name it for what it is, it continues, unchecked, unchallenged, and unpunished." A low murmur rippled through the audience. Several people wiped their eyes. Chairwoman Freeman nodded slowly. "Mrs. Richards, what outcome do you hope for from this inquiry?" Tricia paused. "Accountability," she said, "not vengeance. We've had enough of vengeance masquerading as justice. I want this to mean something beyond one man's downfall. I want policies that protect dignity, not just profits. I want training that reaches hearts, not just compliance checkboxes. And I want those who think like Bentley Jones to understand, respect is not optional." She took her seat. The silence that followed was reverent. In another wing of the city, Zack Richards sat in a glass-walled office surrounded by analysts, accountants, and investigators. Stacks of reports and digital dashboards filled the room. On every screen glowed data, numbers that told stories of bias without saying a word. "Run that breakdown again," Zack said, leaning forward. An analyst tapped a key, and the graph refreshed. The disparity in promotions, salaries, and departmental leadership at Crestline Bank over the last decade. White employees held 82% of managerial positions. Black employees, only 4%. Women of color in leadership, 0.6%. Zack stared at the numbers for a long time before exhaling slowly. "There it is," he murmured. The math behind the mindset. He turned to his assistant. Prepare a summary for release to the press. No spin, no sanitizing. The public deserves the truth. She hesitated. You're sure? This could damage investor confidence. Zack's eyes hardened with conviction. Confidence built on ignorance is a lie. Let's build something real. Within hours, the report hit every major outlet. Headlines blazed across screens. Crestline audit exposes racial inequity in corporate culture. Richards couple leads transparency revolution in banking. From victims to visionaries, the bank that's forcing change. Commentators debated. Some called it radical. Others called it overdue. But no one could deny the truth anymore. Back at the hearing, Bentley was called to testify. He walked to the podium as if approaching a firing squad. His voice was hoarse. I didn't mean for any of this to happen, he began. I thought I was doing my job. I saw two people walking toward a restricted area and... Tricia's calm voice interrupted. And you decided to play God with their dignity. Bentley stopped speaking. Chairwoman Freeman looked at him evenly. Mr. Jones, do you acknowledge that your actions were racially motivated? Bentley swallowed hard. I don't think I'm racist, ma'am. I just reacted. Freeman leaned forward. Then perhaps it's time we redefine what racism looks like. Because if humiliation born from assumption isn't racism, what is? A wave of murmurs rolled through the chamber. Bentley's lawyer touched his arm, whispering for silence. But Bentley looked across the room at Tricia and something in his expression cracked. Something raw, human. I saw you and your husband, he said quietly. I thought, no way you were who you said you were. I've been in that lobby for 10 years, and no one ever looked at me like I was invisible. But you did. You didn't argue. You didn't fight. You just waited. And that's what broke me. You made me see myself. Tricia met his eyes. And what do you see now? Bentley's voice trembled. A man who confused uniform with worth. The room went still. Chairwoman Freeman nodded solemnly. Mr. Jones, the committee will take your testimony into consideration. You may step down. As Bentley walked back to his seat, he looked smaller somehow, like a man stripped of armor, forced to face the reflection beneath it. The hearings continued for weeks. Victims of workplace bias came forward. Tellers, clerks, loan officers, all with stories of subtle discrimination and silent endurance. Each testimony peeled back another layer of what the Richards were fighting to change. Tricia sat through every session, listening, documenting, validating. Zack continued working behind the scenes, restructuring departments, implementing equity-based hiring, and publicly releasing quarterly progress updates. The movement had outgrown them. It was now a force of its own. One evening, after a long day of hearings, Tricia stood outside the Capitol steps, staring out at the city lights. Cameras flashed from a distance, but she ignored them. Zack joined her, his tie loosened, his expression weary but content. You did it, he said softly. Tricia shook her head. We did it. And we're not done. Zack smiled faintly. When are you ever done? She looked at him, her eyes glinting under the lamplight. When respect isn't trending. When it's just normal. He slipped his arm around her waist. Then we keep going. A week later, another headline broke. Crestline CEO Charles Dunning resigns amid bias scandal. The board released a statement. Effective immediately, all executive authority will transition to Zachary and Tricia Richards. Their leadership represents a new moral and structural era for Crestline. In offices around the country, employees watched the internal announcement with a mixture of awe and relief. The very people once humiliated in the lobby were now the embodiment of reform. The next morning, Tricia and Zack returned to the 12th floor boardroom. It looked different now. Brighter, freer. On the wall were the old motto Crestline, tradition and trust once hung. A new inscription gleamed in brushed steel. Crestline United, a bank for everyone. Tricia stood before it for a long time. "Looks right," Zack said. "It feels earned," she replied. As they turned to leave, Elaine approached. "Mrs. Richards," she said softly, "I just wanted to say, thank you. You didn't just change this place. You changed us." Tricia smiled. "Then let's make sure it stays that way." She paused, glancing at the city beyond the window. Because justice doesn't end in a courtroom or a committee hearing. It lives in how we treat each other when no one's watching. Zack placed a hand on her shoulder. "Then maybe, for once, the cameras can stop rolling." Tricia nodded. "Maybe. But the story, our story, still belongs to everyone watching." Outside, the crowd that had gathered to celebrate their victory erupted into applause as the couple emerged hand in hand. Reporters called out questions. Flashbulbs flared. But Tricia didn't look at them. She looked at the people behind the barricades. Everyday citizens. Bank clerks. Mothers. Students. Workers. Each of them carried that same hope. The quiet belief that maybe, finally, the system had begun to see them. And with a quiet smile, she spoke. Not into microphones, but into the air that carried her words farther than she'd ever imagined. Change doesn't start with power. It starts with people who refuse to stay silent. The world heard her loud and clear. And for the first time in Crestline's history, justice didn't whisper. It spoke. ChatGPT said. The city skyline glowed gold that morning. A new dawn, both literal and symbolic, was rising over Crestline National Bank. The lobby, once a scene of humiliation, now buzzed with reporters, cameras, and banners bearing the new slogan. Crestline United. A bank for everyone. Beneath the gleaming marble archway stood Tricia and Zack Richards, side by side, calm and radiant as history turned its page. The same place where they had once been restrained now bore the emblem of rebirth. It was not revenge that brought them here. It was renewal. Every surface had been polished. The marble shone brighter, the air felt lighter, as if the building itself had exhaled its shame. Employees in tailored uniforms moved with quiet reverence. Portraits of the old executives had been removed, replaced with photographs of diverse teams, community projects, and smiling faces from the neighborhood's Crestline now promised to serve. This was no longer just a bank. It was a movement. By mid-morning, the press conference hall was standing room only. Reporters from CNN, BBC, Al Jazeera, and dozens of global outlets filled the rows. Outside, hundreds gathered on the steps, holding signs that read, "Respect is wealth," and "Dignity deposited daily." A massive screen behind the podium displayed the words, "The Respect Standard, launching today." When Tricia Richards walked onto the stage in her signature crimson coat and white dress, the applause rolled like thunder. Zack followed, nodding humbly as cameras flashed. For a long moment, she simply stood there, letting the energy of the crowd wash over her. Her eyes scanned the room, faces she didn't know, voices she didn't trust, but people who now believed in what this moment represented. Then she began. "6 months ago," she said softly, her voice steady, "my husband and I walked into this building for a private meeting. We expected professionalism. We expected courtesy. Instead, we were met with suspicion, hostility, and humiliation." A quiet ripple of murmurs spread through the audience. "I was told we didn't belong here, that we were in the wrong place. But maybe," she paused, her gaze lifting, "that moment wasn't a mistake. Maybe it was the beginning of a conversation the world had been too afraid to have." She stepped closer to the microphone, her words precise and rhythmic, each one hitting like a heartbeat. "Wealth," she said, "means nothing if it can't buy dignity for everyone." The crowd went utterly silent. Even the clicking of cameras stopped. Tricia continued, her voice warming with conviction. "This isn't just about one incident. It's about every closed door that should have been open. Every raised eyebrow that said, You don't belong. Every quiet prejudice that erodes trust in the places that are supposed to serve us all. It's time to rebuild, brick by brick, policy by policy, heart by heart. Zack watched from his seat, pride softening his features. She wasn't just his wife. She was the voice of something larger, something permanent. The respect standard, Tricia said, gesturing toward the screen, is more than a program, it's a promise. Every Crestline employee, from teller to board member, will complete empathy and inclusion training every quarter. Every branch will be held to zero-tolerance standards on discrimination. Every client will be treated as a human being first, and a transaction second. The audience erupted in applause. She raised a hand gently for quiet. But we know laws and policies alone don't change hearts. So we're going further. Today, we're launching the Richards Foundation Scholarship Fund, a $50 million initiative to support underprivileged students pursuing finance, technology, and leadership. Because representation shouldn't be an aspiration, it should be an expectation. A young journalist in the front row lowered her notepad, tears glistening in her eyes. The crowd rose to its feet again. Tricia smiled faintly. This building once made us feel small. But now, it belongs to everyone who's ever felt invisible. Crestline United isn't just a name. It's our new identity. And we will live it, not advertise it. She stepped back as the crowd thundered again, chanting softly, "Respect, reform, rebirth." Zack took the podium next. His presence was quieter but no less commanding. "When we started our first business," he said, "we were turned down by 7 banks. Crestline was one of them." Soft laughter rippled through the room. "We were told we lacked collateral. But what we really lacked," he said, glancing at Tricia, "was trust. The irony is, years later, we became the collateral that saved this institution from collapse. That's not revenge. That's redemption." He paused, looking out at the crowd. The true measure of a company isn't how much money it makes, but how much humanity it preserves. The applause swelled again. Crestline United will no longer chase profit at the expense of principle. We'll invest in small businesses ignored by traditional lending, in minority-owned startups, in women breaking barriers. Because the next Tricia and Zack Richards are out there, waiting to be believed in. The audience stood again, this time in unison. After the conference, the energy spilled into the streets. News anchors called it the most powerful corporate turnaround of the decade. Social media filled with clips of Tricia's speech, the quote, "Wealth means nothing if it can't buy dignity for everyone," trending worldwide. Influencers and activists reposted it beside her photograph, Tricia in red and white, standing behind the Crestline United banner, her expression serene and unstoppable. The image became a symbol, a modern emblem of grace under fire. Some compared her to Rosa Parks, others to Michelle Obama, others simply called her the bank queen who changed everything. But Tricia didn't care for titles. That evening, she sat on the balcony of their home overlooking the river, the city lights dancing on the water. Zack joined her, 2 glasses of wine in hand. "Quite a day," he said softly. She smiled, weary but content. "Quite a beginning." He raised his glass. "To dignity." She clinked his gently. "To respect. The kind that doesn't need cameras." They sat in silence, watching the lights flicker. The next morning, the first phase of the Respect Standard began. Across hundreds of branches, employees gathered for training sessions led by experts in emotional intelligence, diversity, and cultural humility. Videos of Tricia addressing new hires played in lobbies. Her calm voice reminded them, "You don't work for a bank, you work for people. Never forget the difference." In one branch in Atlanta, a young teller who had once doubted her career wiped her eyes as the video ended. "I've never seen someone like me up there before," she whispered. In another branch in Chicago, an older manager who had spent decades looking the other way during subtle acts of bias finally raised his hand and said, "I want to do better." Change was happening, not from fear, but from inspiration. Meanwhile, the scholarship fund opened its first round of applications. Within 48 hours, over 3,000 young people applied, many from neighborhoods that banks once ignored. Letters poured in. "Thank you for seeing us. You've given me a reason to believe again. Now I want to work at Crestline someday." Tricia read every one she could, sometimes smiling, sometimes crying. Zack found her in her office one afternoon surrounded by letters and application forms. "You're still at it?" he asked. "I can't stop," she said, laughing softly. "Every story feels familiar." He looked at her fondly. "Because every story is us." By the end of the year, the transformation was undeniable. Crestline's public approval soared. Other corporations began adopting versions of the Respect standard, rebranding themselves as United, Inclusive, or Open. Even government agencies reached out, requesting consultation on reform programs. But for Tricia and Zack, the greatest moment wasn't the headlines or the accolades. It was walking back into that same lobby one quiet afternoon, hand in hand, without cameras, without crowds. The receptionist smiled at them warmly. "Good afternoon, Mr. and Mrs. Richards. Welcome back. No hesitation. No suspicion. Just respect." Zack grinned. "Feels different, doesn't it?" Tricia looked around, her gaze soft. "No," she said. "It feels right." That night, a televised interview aired. The host, poised and polished, asked Tricia one final question. "Mrs. Richards, after everything you've been through, what's your message to people who face bias, discrimination, or doubt?" Tricia smiled, her eyes thoughtful. "Don't let their assumptions define your worth. Build quietly. Rise gracefully. And when the world finally notices, don't seek revenge. Seek reform." The studio fell silent. The host blinked, visibly moved. "Thank you, Mrs. Richards." "Thank you," Tricia replied softly, "for listening." Later that night, as the credits rolled, millions of viewers saw a final shot. Tricia Richards standing before the Crestline United logo, the words beneath glowing like a promise. "A bank for everyone." And somewhere in that vast audience, someone watching whispered to themselves, "If they can change the system, maybe I can too." If you've been inspired by this story of redemption, resilience, and reform, make sure to subscribe to the channel for more stories that prove change begins with courage. Because sometimes, the quietest revolutions start with one act of respect. The months that followed the rebirth of Crestline United were kind to some and merciless to others. For Tricia and Zack Richards, life had settled into a rhythm of purpose. Meetings with global leaders, interviews, and a calendar packed with reform initiatives. For Bentley Jones, however, time had become a slow, merciless teacher. The morning news no longer carried his name, but the silence that replaced it was worse. Every job application came back the same way. "We appreciate your interest, but we've decided to move forward with another candidate." He stopped counting after the 23rd rejection. At first, Bentley told himself it was temporary. He'd worked in security for 15 years. Banks, corporate offices, even private estates. His record had been spotless, his confidence unwavering. But once the viral footage spread, once millions had seen him sneer, "You people don't belong here," into the camera, there was no wiping the stain away. The internet never forgets. Even when he tried to work under a different name, someone always recognized him. "You're that guy," they'd whisper. "The one from the bank." Some said it with disgust, others with morbid curiosity. But the result was always the same. Doors closed, phones stopped ringing. He lost his apartment first. Then his car. Then his friends. Frank and Finn had at least managed to pick themselves up. Frank had taken counseling seriously and found work at a community center, running security workshops for young people. Finn went back to school, earning a diploma in conflict management. Both men had faced humiliation, but they had learned something from it. Bentley had not. He carried his bitterness like a second skin. Every headline that mentioned the Richards twisted inside him. Every photo of Tricia in her red and white reminded him of the smirk she'd worn when she said, "You've made the mistake of judging wealth by skin." He still heard it in his sleep sometimes, her voice calm, unshaken, while his world fell apart. He couldn't understand how they'd moved on so gracefully, how the same people who'd humiliated him in public could walk through life so untouched by anger. But perhaps that was the point. 3 months later, desperation drove him to the edge of irony. He'd found a posting for a security officer position at the Richards Foundation for Equality and Innovation. The name registered somewhere in his mind, but pride made him overlook it. The pay was good, the benefits solid. It was a global philanthropic organization committed to workplace inclusion and social justice. He chuckled when he read that part, bitterness bubbling in his chest. Still, he filled out the form. Name, experience, references. He hesitated at the section, asking for a statement of values. After several minutes, he typed, "Everyone deserves respect, regardless of status." He hit send. For 2 days, he waited by the phone, checking his inbox every hour. On the 3rd morning, an email arrived. "Dear Mr. Bentley Jones, thank you for your interest in joining the Richards Foundation. After careful review, we've decided to move forward with other candidates. We wish you the best in your continued professional journey." At the bottom, in faint italic text, a line caught his eye. "Respect is wealth too. You never had to lose both." He froze, staring at the words until they blurred. The irony hit him like a physical blow. He closed the laptop, leaned back in his chair, and laughed, a broken hollow sound that echoed through the small apartment. They knew. Of course they knew. Tricia and Zack hadn't needed to say a word. The note said everything. In the following weeks, Bentley drifted. He stopped trying to find work. He spent his days wandering through downtown, avoiding reflections in glass doors. He lived off his savings until there were none left. Sometimes he caught glimpses of Crestline United's ads on screens in shop windows. Smiling employees, slogans of equality. It infuriated him at first. Then, slowly, it just made him tired. He began volunteering at a local shelter, partly out of guilt, partly out of need. The first few days were awkward. People recognized him. Some mocked him, but most ignored him. One afternoon, as he handed out bottled water, a young man approached him. "You used to work at that bank, didn't you?" Bentley stiffened. "Yeah," he said finally. The young man nodded. "You said some things you shouldn't have." Bentley sighed. "Yeah, I did." The man handed him a folded pamphlet. It was a flyer for the Respect Standard program. "I took that training. Changed how I see people," he said quietly. "You should try it." Bentley stared at the pamphlet long after the man left. For the first time, he didn't feel anger. He just felt the dull ache of understanding. Months passed. Seasons changed. The frenzy around Crestline faded into legacy, documentaries, university case studies, business school lectures about the Richards model. Tricia and Zack had become global icons of corporate reform. And yet, one gray afternoon, fate crossed their paths again. Zack was exiting a courthouse after a meeting on financial ethics reform when he spotted a familiar figure across the plaza. Bentley Jones stood near the curb, his once broad shoulders stooped, his uniform replaced by a worn jacket. He looked thinner, older, haunted. Their eyes met. Bentley froze, guilt flickering through his expression like static. He half expected Zack to walk past, to ignore him. But Zack didn't. He crossed the street, his steps measured, his expression unreadable. When he reached Bentley, there was no anger in his face, only quiet gravity. For a moment, neither spoke. The city hummed around them. Finally, Bentley said, "I didn't know." His voice cracked on the words. "I just didn't know who you were." Zack studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "You didn't need to know who we were. You just needed to know who you were." Bentley's eyes dropped. The words landed heavier than any insult could. Zack reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small business card. He handed it over silently. It bore no title, just the Crestline United emblem and a quote beneath. "Respect is wealth too." Then Zack nodded once, a gesture not of forgiveness, but acknowledgement, and walked away. Bentley stood frozen, the card trembling in his hand. That night, he sat alone in his apartment, the television flickering in the background. His dinner had gone cold. The evening news anchor's voice broke through the static of his thoughts. And today at the United Nations Corporate Equality Summit, Tricia Richards addressed global leaders on reforming workplace culture. He turned up the volume. On screen, Tricia appeared in her trademark crimson and white, standing behind the UN podium. Her voice carried the same calm power that had undone him once before. "We build systems," she said, "but sometimes those systems build walls between us. The only way forward is empathy. The kind that listens before it judges, learns before it condemns." Bentley leaned forward, unable to look away. "Prejudice isn't always loud," Tricia continued. "Sometimes, it's the silence of those who should have spoken. But I believe silence can be retrained, turned into awareness, into humility, into change." Her eyes met the camera, and for a moment, it felt as though she were looking directly at him. "If we can transform a place of exclusion into a place of belonging," she said softly, "then no one is beyond redemption. No one." The crowd at the UN erupted into applause. Bentley watched in silence, the flickering light painting his face in shades of regret and recognition. He set down the remote and picked up the Crestline card again. The words beneath the logo glowed faintly in the TV light. "Respect is wealth too." He whispered it aloud, testing the shape of it, the weight. Then, for the first time in months, Bentley closed his eyes, not in shame, but in something that felt almost like peace. Outside, the city glimmered with the quiet pulse of renewal. And somewhere between regret and redemption, Bentley Jones finally began to understand the value of what he'd thrown away. 6 months later, the world had changed, and so had Crestline. The skyscraper that once cast a cold shadow over downtown now stood as a symbol of possibility. Its mirrored windows reflected a different kind of wealth. People of every color, every background, walking through its doors not with fear or hesitation, but with pride. Crestline United had become more than a bank. It was a living testament. Under the Richards leadership, profits soared, yes, but more importantly, principles soared higher. Every branch now pulsed with new life. Former critics had become ambassadors. Employees who once hid behind policies now led with empathy. And across the world, stories began to bloom like spring flowers after a long winter. A young Latina woman in Texas posted a video saying, "I was denied a loan last year because I didn't look like a business owner. But Crestline United called me back. They said my dream was worth believing in." A retired veteran from Detroit wrote an open letter, sharing how a Crestline manager helped him open his first small business account at age 62. "For the first time in years," he wrote, "I felt seen." Hashtags filled the digital space. Hashtag respect is wealth. Hashtag Crestline United. Hashtag the Red Coat Movement. And through it all, one image kept reappearing. Tricia Richards in her crimson coat and white dress, standing beneath the Crestline logo, eyes calm, voice resolute. The morning of the dedication ceremony was radiant, sunlight flooding through the glass atrium where it had all begun. The same lobby where Tricia and Zack had once been humiliated was now unrecognizable. The cold marble gleamed beneath floral arrangements and banners that read, "Here, justice found its voice." Staff members lined the perimeter, many holding small red ribbons pinned to their jackets in solidarity. At the center stood a bronze plaque mounted into the marble wall. Its engraving shimmered in the light. "Here, justice found its voice. In honor of Tricia and Zack Richards." A hush fell over the crowd as the couple approached. Cameras clicked, but this time, it wasn't a spectacle. It was reverence. Tricia paused before the plaque. She reached out and traced her fingers over the inscription. Her reflection shimmered in the polished bronze, and for a moment she saw the version of herself from that day, frightened, furious, yet unbroken. Zack stood beside her, his hand resting lightly on her shoulder. "We made it full circle," he murmured. She smiled softly. "No," she said. "We just made it right." After the unveiling, they walked hand in hand through the lobby, the sound of murmuring admiration following them like music. Employees nodded respectfully. Clients smiled warmly. Diversity was no longer a policy here. It was the pulse. The once intimidating security desk was now staffed by a young woman in a wheelchair and a Sikh man wearing a bright turban. They greeted everyone the same way, with dignity. As Tricia and Zack passed, an elderly woman stepped forward, a client, her eyes filled with tears. "You changed everything," she whispered. Tricia stopped, her red coat catching the sunlight like a banner. She turned to the woman with a gentle smile. "We only reminded them who really belongs," she said. The woman nodded, emotion choking her words. "Bless you both." Later, as they rode the elevator to the executive floor, Tricia looked down through the glass walls at the bustling lobby below. "It's strange," she said quietly. "All this started because someone thought we didn't belong in that space. Now it belongs to everyone." Zack glanced at her. "You realize that code of yours has its own following online?" She laughed. "It's just a coat." "No," he said, smiling. "It's a reminder that dignity never goes out of style." She rested her head lightly against his shoulder as the elevator ascended. "Maybe it's time I retire it," she mused. "Maybe," Zack replied. "But the world will never stop wearing its meaning." At noon, the boardroom filled with their team, diverse faces from around the world. Executives, interns, branch managers, even a few community leaders. Elaine Porter sat near the end of the table, her posture humble yet proud. She had stayed on, transforming into one of the bank's strongest advocates for reform. Zack began the meeting. "When we took over, I said this place needed more than numbers. It needed character. 6 months in, I can say this. You've all built something remarkable. But the work doesn't stop." He gestured toward Tricia, who rose gracefully. "I don't want anyone to forget how this started," she said. "A misunderstanding turned into a mirror. It showed us what we were, so we could become what we needed to be." Her gaze swept the room. "You're the stewards of that legacy now. Every time you treat someone with respect, you reinforce what this name, Crestline United, means." The applause was quiet, heartfelt. That evening, as twilight fell, Tricia and Zack returned to the lobby one last time. The crowd had dispersed. Only the soft hum of cleaners remained. The plaque gleamed under the soft lights. Tricia stood in front of it again, her reflection merging with Zack's beside her. "This," Zack said softly, "isn't just about us." "No," she replied. "It's about what comes after us." They stood there in silence, hand in hand, as the city lights flickered beyond the glass. A janitor passing by paused respectfully. "Beautiful, isn't it?" he said, nodding toward the plaque. Tricia smiled. "It's not the plaque that's beautiful," she said. "It's what it reminds us of. That respect doesn't need permission." The next morning, headlines around the world carried the same photo. Tricia Richards in her red coat, smiling beside the plaque that bore her name. Commentators called it the full-circle image of modern justice. But for Tricia, it wasn't about fame or fortune, it was about finish. She'd once walked into that lobby and been told she didn't belong. Now she could walk through it with grace, and so could anyone else. The red coat had become an icon, not of luxury, but of legacy. That night, as they watched the news from home, Zack turned down the volume. "Do you ever miss the anonymity?" he asked. Tricia thought for a moment. "Sometimes. But then I remember, this was never about being seen. It was about making sure no one ever feels invisible again." He nodded, understanding perfectly. They sat together in quiet reflection, the city glowing beyond their windows. "Trish," he said softly, "you know they'll still talk about this decades from now, right?" "Maybe," she said. "But I hope what lasts isn't the story, it's the lesson." Outside, a light rain began to fall, streaking the glass in silver threads. Tricia stood and walked to the balcony, looking out at the lights of Crestline Tower shimmering in the distance. Her reflection hovered faintly in the glass, the red coat bright against the night. She whispered, almost to herself, "Sometimes wealth isn't hidden in numbers, it's hidden in the way you rise when the world tries to put you down." Zack joined her at the window, slipping an arm around her shoulders. And together, they watched the city that once doubted them, now illuminated by their quiet, unshakable legacy. If this story moved you, don't just let it end here. Subscribe to the channel for more powerful stories that remind us, respect is the greatest form of wealth, and every act of grace can change the world.